In the beginning, I'll just introduce you what this approach is and where does it come from, and what kind of methodological or theoretical basis lie under it. If you just look at this, the title of this approach, Discourse-Historical Approach, and which is commonly known with the acronym DHA. This began in Europe, especially in non-English speaking Europe, and one of the primary aims of this approach was to look at the construction of a certain discourse from historical perspective. How our discourse developed and what kind of socio-cultural meanings it developed throughout its history. So it looks at a discourse. It's not an entirely a different approach from other CDA analysis or other forms of CDA, but it has its special focus on the historical view of a certain discourse or discourse inbuilt problem. There are many theoretical and practical assumptions bases which are common with other forms of CDA. So DHA, as I said a while ago, is not entirely different from other forms of CDA. Still, it has certain differences with other forms of CDA. For example, because of its special focus on historical view of any sociocultural problem built in discourse, this makes it different from other forms of analysis in CDA. Moreover, it is also distinctive at the level of theory as well as at the level of method. Usually, the topics which are discussed more in DHA or researched more in DHA are about sociocultural manipulation or biases, especially political or cultural identity construction, and how it has been seen through the history. This makes it slightly different from other forms of CDA. Then it has a focus on historical dimensions of discourse formation, especially in identity construction issues. And this identity may be local, political, or maybe global identity. These days, the construction of global identity has recently been very much in focus of many discourse historical studies. This DHA has borrowed a lot from Frankfurt School and especially from Habermas language philosophy, in which historical view of language takes precedence over other views. A typical or detailed DHA analysis may take 8 stages, and I'll introduce them to you one by one. A typical DHA analysis would start with a literature view, with a survey of literature where you would study many studies related to what you want to investigate. You will like to trace it through history. It is not necessary that you reduce yourself to the books or topics of critical discourse analysis or DHA only. Rather, you can look an issue through the books of history or other forms of studies also, maybe socio-political studies. Usually, an ideal DHA literature review would be interdisciplinary. Then it would involve, at the second stage, systematic collection of data and context information. Data which is relevant to the main focus of your study, and also you need to identify that the issue you want to investigation may be identity construction of a certain race or class. Which context is more relevant to the construction of the identity of that particular class? You need to identify the immediate and broader context of that problem or discourse construction at the second stage. Then we move on to selection and preparation of data for specific analysis. The most relevant data which you want to investigate, that would employ the text related to that particular identity construction issue you would identify and would like to interpret and analyze that. So the particular data which needs to be investigated would be finalized at third stage according to a typical pattern of DHA. Then at fourth stage, we do specify research questions and formulate assumptions. That's normal with many other forms of research also. In most kinds of research, we formulate our research question and assumptions or hypotheses, which we need to answer by the end of that research. So in DHA, we also specify research questions. These are those focused points a researcher would like to answer. Moving on, we conduct a qualitative pilot analysis. This is very specific to critical discourse analysis, and especially to critical discourse analysis. Then most of the researchers in this field, they conduct maybe a small pilot analysis before they go on to full-scale analysis. This actually sets the dimensions of the analysis and let the reader know. It's slightly different from a typical quantitative analysis where things are fixed already, and methods and measures, tools are already decided, and you put your analysis in a certain pattern. In CDA and DHA, an analysis may take its own form when you start analyzing it in reality. It may slightly or may largely be different from your earlier perceptions. So therefore, it's always important to conduct a pilot study before you move on to a full-scale analysis. At sixth stage, we go for a detailed case study or detailed analysis of the data which you have gathered by looking into it from all possible angles, tracing the history of the discourse under study, and looking at it from various prisms possible. Then you formulate the critique. Critique is a socio-cultural insight into the construction of that particular discourse. In relation to DHA, this would also involve historical and political view of the discourse which is being studied. So critique of the construction of the discourse and the discourse itself and its various components would be a part of this stage. Then we go for finally application of the detailed analytical results. So critical discourse analysis and for that matter discourse-historical approach clearly defines its goal, that it's not only a theoretical study where you pile on books and books or you compile studies after studies without any practical application. DHA is very much goal oriented and practice oriented. DHA researchers focus on providing insights into the practical issues of real life. They may be identity related, some kind of discrimination related, but it tells you where the findings of a certain research in DHA can be applied in the real life. So to sum up, we can say that DHA is very much real life oriented study.